Have you ever found yourself in a room full of people, laughter echoing, voices rising and falling, and yet deep down you felt strangely alone? Have you ever received an invitation to dinner, a get-together, a celebration, and instead of feeling excited, you hesitated? Maybe you even felt relieved when something came up that allowed you to say no. If any of that sounds familiar, you're not the only one. Many people in their 60s, 70s, and beyond experience this quiet shift. It doesn't happen all at once. It's not loud or dramatic. It just settles in like the evening light. And sometimes even we don't quite understand it ourselves. There was a time when being around others felt natural. Conversations flowed easily. Connections felt energizing. You showed up with warmth, offered your presence generously, and took comfort in the closeness of others. But now, peace feels more nourishing than parties. Solitude feels more honest than small talk. And silence, once uncomfortable, has become a trusted friend. This isn't because you've stopped caring, and it's not because something is wrong with you. It might just mean you've grown. Because with time, something remarkable happens. We begin to tune into ourselves more than we ever did before. We learn to listen to what drains us and what restores us. You start making different choices. You become more selective with your time, more thoughtful with your energy, and more protective of your peace. Not everyone will understand it. Some might think you're pulling away, but the truth is you're realigning. You're no longer trying to say yes to everything just to meet expectations. You're learning to say no with grace. No to conversations that don't feed your spirit. No to gatherings that feel more like performances than connection. No to the noise that drowns out your inner voice. And that's not something to apologize for, that's something to honor. Because you've lived long enough to know your time is valuable, your energy is sacred, and your peace is worth protecting. So if you've been feeling a little more distant lately, if you've started choosing quiet over crowds, know this: you're not fading, you're not breaking, you're transforming. And if this opening spoke to something in your soul, stay with me. Because in the next part, we'll explore one of the deepest reasons this shift happens and why it's not weakness, but wisdom. So if you found yourself stepping back a little, if conversations no longer feel as inviting, and social gatherings start to feel like something you'd rather avoid than look forward to, you might wonder what changed. The truth is you've lived long enough to know that connection comes at a cost, and sometimes you just can't afford to keep paying with your heart. Not every withdrawal is a reaction to pain, but many are, because over the years you've likely been let down. Maybe not always in big, dramatic ways. Sometimes it's the small things: a friend who slowly fades away when you needed them most, a moment you opened up only to be met with disinterest, a promise broken not once but enough times to remind you that not everyone means what they say. You don't carry anger, you carry memory, and with that memory comes quiet wisdom. You've learned that not everyone deserves front row access to your soul, so now, when someone invites you into a space you're unsure of, you pause, you reflect, and sometimes you choose peace instead. Not because you're closed off, but because you're finally discerning. There's something powerful that happens when you stop offering yourself out of obligation and start honoring your own boundaries. You begin to feel less guilty about turning down a lunch you're not ready for. You no longer apologize for needing rest instead of another round of small talk. You give yourself permission to skip the noise and simply be. This doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've started to care differently. You no longer seek to prove your loyalty by stretching yourself thin. You've done that. You've shown up time and time again, and sometimes it cost you more than anyone knew. And now you choose to protect your energy, because you finally understand that it is limited and sacred. Take a moment and think back to the times you stayed longer than you wanted to, just to avoid disappointing someone. The conversations you endured though your heart wasn't in them. The times you smiled when inside you just wanted silence. It's no wonder with time you've started choosing differently, and that doesn't make you cold, that makes you wise. There's a kind of fatigue that doesn't come from the body but from the soul. A weariness that grows when you've been generous with your love, your time, your presence, and haven't always received the same in return. So now you pause, not out of fear, but out of clarity. You notice the people who lift you and the ones who drain you. You begin to value conversations that leave you feeling nourished, not empty. And if those moments are few, you choose to stay home. Because you've finally discovered that solitude can be far more satisfying than shallow connection. You don't owe explanations for the boundaries you create. You don't have to defend your decision to protect your peace. You've earned the right to say, I need space. And to mean it. You've earned the right to say, I'd rather be alone tonight, without guilt. You've earned the right to put your well-being before appearances. Because after all these years, you've realized something that takes many a lifetime to learn. You are not here to constantly pour. You are also here to refill. And if pulling back is how you do that now, so be it. There is quiet power in that, there is dignity, and there is healing. And then something else begins to happen, a change not just in how you feel, but in how the world seems to respond to you. You find yourself in conversations and notice that people don't really ask anymore. They don't ask about your past, about your experiences, about what you think or how you've been. It's not out of cruelty, it's not even intentional. But still it stings, you talk and they nod distractedly. You offer a story and halfway through, they're already somewhere else in their mind or on their phone. It's subtle, but it leaves a mark. You start to wonder if anyone really wants to hear you, not just your words, but your truth, your perspective, your story in full color, not just the polite highlights. You might feel like the world is moving too fast and you're no longer part of the rhythm. You notice the language changing, the pace, the expectations, the values, and suddenly, the places and people that once felt familiar don't feel like home anymore. You're not doing anything wrong, but slowly you begin to retreat, not because you've stopped loving others, but because you feel unseen. And being unseen, especially after a lifetime of giving, is one of the loneliest feelings there is. You start to share less, not because you don't have wisdom, but because no one seems to notice when you do. You feel invisible. Not because you've disappeared, but because the world has stopped looking. Take a moment, breathe. If this is something you've felt, know that you are not alone. This experience is more common than people realize, but it's rarely spoken aloud, and the silence around it can make it feel even heavier. But you need to hear this. Just because others have stopped asking doesn't mean your story has lost its worth. Just because someone didn't lean in doesn't mean your words had no weight. Your life has mattered, it still does. The way you see the world, the things you've survived, the values you've carried, the love you've offered freely, all of it still matters. And if you're not being heard, it's not because you've become less. It may be because the world around you has forgotten how to listen. But don't let that quiet your spirit. Let it remind you of this. You deserve to be in spaces where your voice isn't just tolerated but welcomed, where your wisdom isn't treated as old-fashioned but honored, where you don't have to fight to be understood because understanding lives in the room with you. And until those spaces appear, it's okay to seek the safety of your own company, not because you've given up, but because you've chosen not to shrink yourself for others anymore. There's strength in knowing when to speak, but there's also strength in knowing when silence is the better path. And if lately you've chosen quiet, don't confuse that with weakness. That's discernment, that's maturity. That's the voice inside you saying, I know who I am. And I no longer need the world to validate that. And then there's another feeling that creeps in. It doesn't arrive loudly. It doesn't wear a name, but you know it when it settles in your chest. It's the fear of being a burden, not because anyone said you were, not because anyone made you feel that way directly, but because deep down you don't want to make anyone's life harder, especially the people you love most. You begin to think twice before calling, before asking for help, before mentioning that small pain in your back, or that ride you could have used, or that thing you've been struggling to carry, not just physically, but emotionally. You stay quiet, not out of pride, but out of care. You don't want to inconvenience anyone. You don't want to interrupt their schedules, their routines, their peace. So you start saying, I'm fine, even when you're not. You start saying, don't worry about me, even when you wish they would. And slowly, your world gets smaller. You say no to invitations, not because you don't want to go, but because you don't want them to adjust their plans around you. You hold back tears, not because you're not hurting, but because you don't want to add more weight to someone else's already heavy day. You sit quietly in moments when you used to speak freely, because somewhere along the way you've convinced yourself that needing others is somehow a weakness. But let's be honest, that belief doesn't come from nowhere. It often comes from a lifetime of being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who carried others without asking anything in return. And now the idea of leaning on someone else feels foreign, even uncomfortable. You don't want pity, you don't want to feel like a project. You just want to be held in spirit, in presence, without feeling like your existence requires extra effort. But here's the truth you may need to hear today. Your needs are not a burden. Your presence is not a problem. And the people who love you, truly love you, will not see your vulnerability as weakness, but as an invitation to show up for you the way you've always shown up for them. They may not always say it the right way. They may not always notice when you're pulling away. But that doesn't mean you're alone. You're just in a place now where your giving heart is tired. And it's learning how to receive slowly, gently, and with grace. You are allowed to ask for help without feeling guilty. You are allowed to want company without fearing that you're in the way. You are allowed to say, I need someone right now, without apology. And if your voice trembles when you say it, that's okay too, because asking for support isn't a sign that you're losing strength. It's a sign that you're finally allowing yourself to be human. And being human, especially after carrying the weight of others for so long, is one of the most courageous things you can be. So if lately you've found yourself declining invitations, avoiding calls, or choosing silence out of fear of being too much, pause. Ask yourself gently, is it really peace you're choosing, or is it protection? Are you really content in your solitude, or are you hiding inside it? And if the answer isn't clear, that's okay too. Healing isn't always a straight line. Sometimes it begins with simply recognizing how deeply you long to feel safe enough to take up space again. And you deserve that space, not because you've earned it, but because you exist. And that is always enough. And then one day, you notice something even quieter. Some people just fade. There was no falling out, no argument, no final goodbye, just time pulling you in different directions. Maybe it started with fewer phone calls, then the regular lunches turned into sometime soon. Then months pass and you realize you haven't heard from them at all. You scroll through old photos, remembering the laughter, the inside jokes, the days when you spoke without needing to explain yourself. Now there's silence, not painful, just empty, and it's strange how that kind of fading can leave behind something so heavy. You think about reaching out, but then you hesitate, not out of pride, but because you're not sure what's left to return to. Maybe you've both changed. Maybe the seasons that once connected you have passed, and you're no longer walking the same road, and that's hard to admit. Because those relationships, they weren't casual. They were woven into your routines, your memories, your sense of who you were, but slowly life happened, priorities shifted, health changed, schedules filled, and without meaning to, you drifted. Now the space that used to be full feels still, not lonely all the time, just different. And in that difference, you begin to realize something important. Some connections are meant to last a season, not a lifetime. It doesn't mean they weren't real. It doesn't mean they didn't matter. It just means you're both becoming someone new. And sometimes, what you need at this stage of life isn't who you needed back then. You don't have the same energy. The same conversations no longer spark joy. The same rhythms no longer match. And instead of forcing closeness that feels strained or unnatural, you quietly choose space. Not out of anger, but out of respect for yourself and for the history you shared. Because forcing what no longer fits can feel lonelier than letting it go. So you let it fade. With grace. With a soft kind of gratitude, and maybe a little ache, but without blame, because you've grown, they've grown, and growth often creates distance. But here's the thing, the distance doesn't erase the closeness you once had. It simply makes room for something different, not always more, not always better, but different. Sometimes what you need now is less about who's beside you and more about how you feel when you're alone. You begin to realize that peace isn't found in full calendars or a long list of contacts. Peace is in the quiet hour before sunrise, in the walk you take without talking, in the soft ritual of making tea just for yourself. And if you've recently let go of someone, or maybe they let go of you, know this, you didn't fail, you didn't lose, you simply shifted. And that shift is not something to mourn, it's something to respect. Because when you stop chasing what used to be, you make space for what wants to arrive now. If you're still here, still breathing with these words, still nodding quietly to yourself, know that this moment of reflection is something sacred. You're not the only one navigating these goodbyes. And you're not wrong for choosing quiet, for outgrowing certain dynamics, for needing space. You're simply honoring who you are now. And that is one of the most courageous things a soul can do. And maybe, just maybe, after all the shifts, after all the quiet goodbyes, after all the moments when the world seemed to move past you, you begin to discover something unexpected. You realize you no longer feel the need to chase connection, not because you're closed off, not because you've stopped caring, but because you've finally learned how to be with yourself and not just tolerate the quiet, but treasure it. You wake up and no one's calling, but you're okay. You sit in the living room, no TV on, just the hum of the day unfolding slowly outside, and your chest doesn't ache. It softens. You start to notice things you once hurried past. The way the light hits the window in the early afternoon, the sound of the birds finding each other, the rhythm of your own breath when no one else is around. You realize something powerful. Your own presence is enough. You don't need constant conversation to feel alive. You don't need an audience to feel valid. You don't need to be needed to feel valuable. You've spent so many years giving, doing, supporting, showing up. And while you'd never regret the love you've poured out, now you understand that you deserve some of it for yourself, not leftovers, not what's left when everyone else is taken care of, but full, intentional, quiet love for you. And that kind of love, it often blooms in solitude, not loneliness, not sadness, but solitude, a sacred space where you don't have to explain anything. You don't have to smile when you're tired. You don't have to hide your thoughts or adjust your feelings for someone else's comfort. You just get to be. And in that space, you begin to feel whole again. Not because everything is perfect, but because for once you're not trying so hard to belong somewhere else. You've come home to yourself. Some people won't understand this. They might see your stillness and worry. They might assume you're sad or lonely or withdrawing out of pain. But you know the truth. You're not escaping anything. You're embracing something. A rhythm that finally matches who you are now, a pace that allows your spirit to breathe, a kind of presence that doesn't require performance, only honesty. You've spent so much of your life showing up for others. Now you're showing up for yourself, and it's not selfish, it's sacred. There is healing in solitude, there is wisdom in stillness, and there is joy real. Unshakable joy in discovering that the best company you may ever find is already within you. So don't be afraid if the crowd has grown quiet. Don't fear the hush that comes with this season of life, because within that hush you may finally hear the voice you've ignored the longest, your own.